Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for this conversation on the HACR Corporate Inclusion Index. My name is Dr. Lisette Garcia, and I'm the Chief Research Officer here at HACR. I lead the team that's responsible for executing the Corporate Inclusion Index, and our webinar today is going to discuss not only the findings from the 2023 report, but give you a quick overview of how your company can get involved and participate in the 2024 CII. As part of our conversation today, I want to tell you a little bit about HACR, the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility. Founded in 1986, the Hispanic Association on Corporate Responsibility, or HACR, is one of the most influential advocacy organizations in the nation. Our mission is to advance the inclusion of Hispanics in corporate America at a level that's commensurate with our economic contributions. And to do that, we look at 4 pillars of economic opportunity: employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. Many of you are familiar with HACR's programs and the work we do to provide professional development opportunities to Hispanic professionals in corporate America. But you may not have known about the HRI, or the HACR Research Institute. The HACR Research Institute is the team that's dedicated to conducting independent research on HACR's behalf. This team works collaboratively with our partners to assess and inform on the status of Hispanics in corporate America. Through our thought leadership, we are changing how corporate America invests and works with the Hispanic community. Examples of the research efforts the HRI has produced include the 2019 HACR STEM report and the Latina Empower Her report, which provided the basis for the creation of the Latina Empower Her Summit. But the report we are most known for is the annual Corporate Inclusion Index, and that's the focus of our discussion today. Since 2009, HACR has been conducting the annual CII to take a comprehensive measurement of the business practices, strategies, and initiatives of participating companies. It enables us to be able to compile and track data and trends, but it also offers tips and guidance to advance the important work of Hispanic inclusion. The CII was designed with large Fortune 500 companies in mind, but that's not to say that companies outside of the Fortune ranking wouldn't find it useful. It provides a data-driven benchmark of your progress in employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. So now that you know a little bit about HACR and a little bit about the survey, let me share with you some of the findings from this year's report. For each pillar, I'm going to share a few key points, followed by a discussion of some of the opportunities for companies to focus on to further advance Hispanic inclusion. So let's get started. This year's HACR CII continues to show fluctuations in Hispanic representation in corporate America as companies continue to adjust their post-pandemic operations. Overall, 15% of employees at the participating companies were Hispanic, which is lower than the Bureau of Labor Statistics estimate of Hispanic representation in the workforce, which is 18%. And when we break that down to take a closer look at non-exempt and exempt positions, we find that Hispanics are more likely to hold non-exempt positions than exempt positions. In fact, among this year's participating companies, Hispanic non-exempt employees represented 73% of the total Hispanic employees, indicating an overrepresentation in such positions. Hispanic representation across all types of positions is important within an organization. However, avoiding an overrepresentation of Hispanics in non-exempt roles relative to their overall employee population is critical. This overconcentration in positions that are precarious in nature and usually more at risk has far-reaching impacts on opportunities for advancement and inclusion. Exempt positions often lead to a path to the top. They offer better benefits, better working conditions, and advancement opportunities. So it's essential to see greater representation of Hispanics in these roles to fuel the pipeline of future corporate leaders. So let's focus for a moment on the start of that pipeline. Internships. Internships play an essential role in introducing a new generation of employees to your company and illustrate what a career at your organization looks like. They're critical in demonstrating the possibilities to the next generation. Investments in these programs are an excellent way of attracting new employees. And nearly all participating companies in the CII this year indicated that they had an internship program and that it was inclusive of Hispanics. However, Hispanics accounted for just more than 13% of interns. So there's an opportunity to do more here. Think of engaging your ERGs in this important work or partnering with Hispanic serving institutions to create a pipeline program. Another opportunity for companies lies in further developing goals and metrics for assessing the effectiveness of internal talent development programs such as mentorship programs. While almost all participating companies reported having a mentorship program, a smaller proportion, about 70%, indicated that they had both established goals and metrics to evaluate the success of these programs. Investing in DEI efforts and Hispanic inclusion isn't just about creating programs, it's also about evaluating and structuring them to achieve their desired outcomes. Internship and mentorship programs are just two examples of ways in which we can ensure that the pipeline to leadership includes Hispanics. But they are some of the most common ways, and we want to ensure that these programs are effective and efficient. And of course, data is crucial to that. So let's move on to our next pillar, procurement. Hispanic inclusion in procurement was a challenge before the pandemic and remains a challenge after. Fewer than 1% of suppliers were Hispanic, and just slightly more than 1% of total spend was with Hispanic-owned businesses. Historically, one of the biggest challenges in procurement is data and the willingness of companies to be transparent with us regarding their procurement information. Companies should prioritize the investment necessary to collect better data and be willing to share that data in their benchmarking efforts. Some proven strategies for success in this area include having a strategic plan for supplier diversity that is reviewed regularly, and working with trade associations to identify eligible suppliers, having a separate budget for supplier diversity, and thinking beyond Tier 1 to have mechanisms in place to hold their suppliers accountable for their own supplier diversity, or Tier 2. Amongst our sample, nearly all had a strategic plan for supplier diversity, and it was reviewed regularly. And many were working with trade associations to identify diverse suppliers and had a separate budget for supplier diversity. However, fewer than 2/3 of the participating companies held their Tier 1 suppliers accountable for supplier diversity, an important mechanism if we're ever going to see the needle move when it comes to spend with Hispanic-owned businesses. Before we move on to the opportunities in procurement, I see that the chat is moving quite quickly, right? So I see folks chatting away, sharing their location and where they're joining us from. But I'd also like to encourage you to share your questions in the chat. So that way we can take questions as we're going on through the conversation as well as at the end. So when it comes to the opportunities in procurement, further opportunities in procurement lie in aiding and supporting Hispanic-owned businesses to ensure that they are able to develop the capacity and capability to do business with them today and in the future. Since the pandemic's onset, diverse supplier development initiatives have declined. Pre-pandemic, nearly 80% of participating companies offered these development initiatives. dropping to just over 60% during the height of the pandemic. This year, nearly 70% of participating companies reported offering supplier development initiatives, with roughly about 10% of Hispanic suppliers across the sample participating in those development initiatives. This upward trend is what we like to see. These development initiatives are central to ensuring that Hispanic-owned businesses are able to continue, grow, and flourish. So moving on to philanthropy now. Our third pillar is philanthropy. Investment in philanthropic efforts, like those in Hispanic-owned businesses, is an investment in the community with far-reaching impact. Among the companies participating, over 90% reported making corporate donations, while only 36% of those companies could effectively track and report their donations to the Hispanic community. 61 companies reported having a foundation, but only 39% of them were able to accurately track and report dollars donated to the Hispanic community. Only 1/3 of the participating companies reported the ability to track volunteer hours in the Hispanic community, and of those, only 41% reported any hours, volunteer hours. These numbers represent represent employee-wide volunteer efforts in the Hispanic community, not just those led by the Hispanic ERG. But we did also ask about ERG-led volunteer efforts. And while nearly 95% of companies indicated that their ERGs are involved in various philanthropic events, only 41% tracked the number of hours their ERGs spent volunteering their time in the Hispanic community. Tracking and reporting of both monetary donations and volunteer hours in the Hispanic community continue to present challenges for the participants of the CII. This is significant because data provides evidentiary support to identify where programs or initiatives are needed and helps to ensure the efficient use of resources, both human and financial. So, thinking about the opportunities in philanthropy, perhaps some of the challenges to tracking and reporting stem from an opportunity that seems much more fundamental for philanthropic efforts, and that's strategy and planning. Nearly 1/3 of the companies that participated did not have a strategic plan for their foundation. And of those who did have a plan, 1/3 did not review it regularly. These are fundamental things for philanthropic efforts to be successful. A regularly reviewed strategic plan that guides decision-making to ensure maximum impact on meeting current needs is required. Sustained investment in DEI and Hispanic inclusion requires intentional efforts that can be tracked, analyzed, and evaluated to assess impact. This takes careful planning, strategy, and constant evaluation in order to be successful. So, in terms of governance, our last pillar that we're going to be discussing for our findings, many of you may be familiar with the Missing Pieces report that HACR produces in partnerships with the members of the Alliance for Board Diversity, the Executive Leadership Council, Leadership Education for Asian Pacifics, and Catalyst, along with our partner Deloitte, which is a census of the representation of underrepresented groups on the boards of Fortune 100 and 500 companies. That data is a complete census, which is a bit different from what we do with the CII. And that report focuses solely on the composition of boards and board committees. The HACR CII is much more comprehensive and looks not only at representation of Hispanics on the boards, but also the composition of the leadership pipeline. I'm going to focus on that leadership pipeline in this conversation. In the CII, we define 3 levels of leadership: Class A, Class B, and Class C. Class A represents the individuals who are direct reports to the CEO. Class B represents those individuals who report to Class A or are 2 levels from the CEO. And Class C represents the folks that report to Class B or are 3 levels from the organization's CEO. Hispanic representation in these executive roles remains notably low, with only around 5% of Class A positions being held by Hispanics. And if we look at this percentage for Latinas, it drops to nearly 2%. So 2% of the CEO's direct reports are Latina. Similar trends continue across Class B and Class C, with Hispanics occupying 6% and 2% respectively in both Class B and Class C. And if we look at the proportion of Latinas, we see that they occupy about 3% of the positions in both Class B and Class C. But what was perhaps most alarming in this year's results is that nearly half, or 49% of the participating companies, had no Hispanic executives in these categories at all. There are some supportive measures to ensure Hispanic representation in the pipeline and on corporate boards. Common practices include engaging external recruiters for filling board and executive roles while requiring them to present diverse slates from both internal and external recruiters. And almost all participating companies reported that they used external recruiters to fill open board and executive positions. And nearly all participating companies required external recruiters to present diverse slates as well. So the mechanisms are in place. We just have not seen the progress thus far. When it comes to governance, sustained investments in DEI and Hispanic inclusion doesn't just mean dollars. It means time. It means prioritizing this work and holding everyone accountable for it. Including diversity goals with specific metrics as part of the performance process for the leaders of your organization goes a long way to demonstrating your commitment to this work and achieving success. Although it's encouraging that almost 75% of this year's sample integrates these goals and metrics as part of executive performance reviews, 25% still don't, illustrating that there's still an opportunity here. Accountability is key. Without it, it can be difficult to really see progress. Diversity goals with specific metrics that are part of executive performance reviews are an important step. All right. Now that we've discussed some of the findings from the 2023 report, I'd like to talk a little bit about participation and then followed by what to expect if you participate in 2024. So when we look at participation for 2023, we had 92 total participating companies, of which 72 were returning companies and 10 were new companies this year. 62 of the participating companies were HACR corporate member companies, and 39 of them were Fortune 100 companies. So that gives you an idea of the types of organizations that are taking the Corporate Inclusion Index. And just as a quick summary about how the companies fared on the index this year, 58 out of the total 92 companies received 5 stars in one or more of the pillars, and 3 companies received 5 stars in all 4 pillars. So if you'd like to see more information on participation, including a list of the companies that participated, or explore any of the findings that I've highlighted today, or read the others that are included in the report, you can download a copy of the report from our website. And please do that. It provides a lot of useful information. So I'm going to pause here for just a moment to see if there are any questions that we need to address before we move into a discussion of understanding how the Corporate Inclusion Index submission works and how to participate in the 2024 index. So if you have some questions, please place those in the chat, and the team is going to be monitoring that chat to let us know. All right. Not seeing any questions coming through in the chat, so I think I'm going to take that as a sign that it's okay to move on to talking a little bit about the survey itself and what to expect when you participate. So, to recap, as we've just been discussing, there are 4 focus areas in the survey that are aligned to the pillars in HACR's mission. And we've been talking about them, right? So, employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. And for each of these focus areas, there are a series of questions that fall into one of 2 formats. Questions that ask about the types of policies and initiatives that you have in place, and questions that ask how Hispanics are faring within your company or the metrics. I've shared some examples of the kinds of metrics that we collect in our conversation today, but those were just some examples. There are over 150 questions on the survey. And to ensure your comfort with sharing this information with us, all participants must complete a non-disclosure agreement. As part of your participation, we also offer technical support throughout the process. And after your survey submission, we conduct individual review calls to ensure data accuracy before finalizing your rating. These individualized reviews ensure that the data is correct and give us a chance to discuss improvements year over year and the opportunities that remain with each participating company. Finally, one key difference between the HACR CII and some of the other surveys that are out there is that we are rating companies and not ranking them. All participants have an equal chance of receiving the highest rating in each of the pillars. So let's learn a little bit more about these ratings. So as I just mentioned, the HACR CII ratings are designed around 2 focus areas for each of the pillars, a practice assessment and an outcomes assessment. In each pillar, the practice assessment consists of 25 elements, which examine what type of support or infrastructure a company has in place for diversity and inclusion. These questions are comprised of a series of yes or no and multiple choice questions. The outcomes assessment for each pillar examines key indicators or measures by which companies evaluate progress or change on diversity and Hispanic inclusion efforts. These questions are typically quantitative in nature, or the metrics. HACR uses a 5-star rating system, and each pillar is rated separately with no overall rating. So in other words, we do not average across the 4 pillars to produce an overall rating. Each pillar is rated separately. And the only ratings that we disclose publicly are 5-star ratings. So that means that if you participate, you will be listed as a participating company But no one will know how many stars you've received unless you've received 5 stars, and then you will be listed as a 5-star company for that pillar in the report. One important thing to note about the HACR CII, the survey submission and review call process, is that there is no cost to participate. So we do not charge for you to complete the survey or for the review and assessment. So some of you may be wondering if it's too late to participate in the 2024 cycle, and I have good news. The answer is no. The survey is set to launch on January 8th, 2024, so there is still time to reach out to us and get added to the participation list. I will share contact information for how to reach the members of the HRI team in order to express an interest in participating at the end of the presentation. The survey itself will remain open until March 29th, 2024. But I would not advise waiting past the end of January to express an interest in participating so that you have adequate time to compile your responses. Remember that the survey is 150 questions that cover not only employment, but also procurement and philanthropy and governance. So there will likely be multiple stakeholders within your company who will be working with you on your submission. So you want to be sure you have enough time to source your data from all of the different units within your organization to successfully submit your survey. Once you have submitted your survey, you will schedule an individual review call with our team. In advance of your review call, we will provide your preliminary rating and a copy of your submission. During your review call, we'll discuss the preliminary rating and we'll address any questions we may have about your submission. If there are any adjustments that are needed, you will have a short window of time after your review call to provide written documentation of the adjustments, after which we will provide your final rating. Your rating is embargoed until the report release date, which coincides with our annual symposium, tentatively scheduled for October 14th, 2024. To help you amplify your participation and your rating, our team will share with you a media kit with different elements, including badges and sample talking points and social media posts. And lastly, during the symposium, we will host at least one session which focuses on the report and where we invite 5-star companies to share their best practices in each of the pillars. And all 5-star companies will receive an award during a special recognition ceremony at the symposium. So I'm going to pause here and look back at the chat because now I see more chat bubbles. So give me a moment while we review the chat. So David Gonzalez, thank you for your comment about the longitudinal data that shows some movement upward, right? And increase in Hispanic representation in the executive ranks. But we are seeing the same things. We've not really seen significant change here in the last few years. So there is still more work to be done there. I have a question here from LinkedIn. It says, do we have to share any internal documents such as internal policies, employee information, etc.? And the answer to that question is no. We don't ask for any individualized employee information as part of the CII submission. Everything that we ask you to report when it comes to numbers is all aggregated up at your total company level. We don't ask for numbers about or information about individuals. With one key exception is we do ask who the highest ranking Hispanic executives are within an organization so that we can track progress. But apart from that, we don't collect any individual level data on any of the employees within your company. And everything that you share with us, remember, is embargoed or covered by the non-disclosure agreement. And so we take that non-disclosure agreement pretty seriously, and we don't discuss it outside of the HACR research team and with our primary point of contact within your organization. So there's a question in the chat about whether or not the CII is open to nonprofit organizations or if it's only for corporations. I will say that the survey and its questions were designed around Fortune 500 companies, so large corporations. However, um, you know, it they are pretty essential questions about not only strategies, processes, and initiatives that are in place, but also, we've identified key metrics that are good indicators of progress when it comes to Hispanic inclusion. So while the survey itself is sort of based on or driven by Fortune companies, it's still useful for other types of organizations to participate. Now, of course, if it's a small nonprofit organization, fewer than, let's say, 1,000 employees, it might not be as easy for you to compile the information. And depending on how you're set up and your structure, there may be a lot of questions that are not necessarily applicable to you. But we're always happy to have a conversation with anyone who's interested to determine if the Corporate Inclusion Index is a good fit in terms of helping you to benchmark your Hispanic inclusion. So I'm going to scroll back up just to make sure I've covered all of the questions from earlier. So there's a question that asks about what is the window for completing the HACR CII. So the survey will open on January 8th in 2024 and remain open until March 29th of 2024, after which we'll be conducting the review calls, and we hope to have all of the review calls finalized by June 7th, and everyone's rating finalized at that point. And then the report will be produced after that, and we will share those results publicly during the symposium in October. There's another question here about whether or not the CII includes a measure for Hispanic talent retention. So again, because we're not collecting individualized information, we can't assess individual employee retention, but we do look at the change in Hispanic employees from one year to the next. And we have a series of questions that ask companies about the initiatives and programs that they have in place in order to retain their talent. So while we can't say that I, Lisette Garcia, who worked at HACR, still work at HACR next year on the CII survey because we don't collect individual level data, we do have a number of questions related to retention and what companies are doing, the types of initiatives and programs that they have to support the movement of their employees through the organization. So, any additional questions? Looking here, see a question here that's asking if we can share sample questions with you. So we typically do not share the questions in advance of your commitment to participate in the survey. What we will do for companies that would be first-time participants who have not participated in the past is we will do an orientation call for you, and we've done several of those over the last couple of months. They take about 30 minutes where we review the platform that we collect the data on. We talk a little bit about that. We talk about the types of questions to expect on the survey. We talk about the process for the survey submission and what happens after you submit the survey. And we can talk sort of in general about the kinds of information that we collect, but we do not share the exact questions that are included in the survey. I see another question here that asks, how big does your company need to be in order to participate? And again, that's kind of a difficult question to answer. We have had companies with just a couple thousand employees take the CII in the past, and we've had companies with several 100,000 employees take the CII. So there's not really necessarily a minimum or a maximum when it comes to the number of employees or how big the company has to be in order to participate. Um, there's just always a chance that if your organization is too small, that many of the questions that we're asking to try and assess your inclusion efforts and the strategies and programs that you have in place may not be applicable because of the size of your organization. The flip side to that is that if it's something that you're currently not doing, perhaps taking the survey may be a way of sort of wrapping your arms around what some of the best practices are and gives you ideas for things that you could implement, right? Because the questions that are part of the CII are questions that we've derived from years of research and have been identified by our research and other research as best practices when it comes to diversity and inclusion work in workplaces. And so even small companies can see a benefit from participating in the survey, because if they're not as familiar with those best practices, the survey does help you kind of think about what those are and how you can incorporate them or some version of them into the work that you're currently doing. So there's another question here about, has HACR reviewed the Supreme Court's ruling on affirmative action and how these rulings impact diversity, equity, inclusion in corporate America? If so, what is the CII's approach in response to that? So that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. We have reviewed the ruling, and we have been talking about it internally and also with legal counsel to ensure that our NDA would protect companies if they were to participate in the survey. So you may, if you are a past participating company who has joined us and you're familiar with the survey, you may see some changes to the NDA in the upcoming year as we work to ensure that there is protection for the folks that participate in the survey. And, from my perspective as an individual here, I will say that, the rulings on affirmative action have really made us think about how do we increase what we're doing when it comes to diversity and inclusion work. And if you download the 2023 report, the CII report, you'll see that our discussion is really focused on now being the time to really up your efforts and up the work that you're doing when it comes to this work, so that we do not see those rulings negatively impact all of the progress that we have made in the past few years. So another question about accessing the questions of the CII. Again, we don't publicly disclose the specific questions of the CII, but if you'd like to have a conversation, we are happy to have that conversation with you. You just need to reach out to us via the research email, which is just research@hacr.org. And we're happy to schedule an orientation call with you about the questions and what to expect when you participate in the survey. Lots of questions about getting copies of the questions, right? Here's another one. Would we be able to get a copy of the focal areas and questions so that we can self-assess before we officially participate? So I will share, the focal areas are employment, procurement, philanthropy, and governance. When it comes to the employment side, we look at not only, what your current employee distributions look like, right? So we ask questions about, your total number of employees and what the Hispanic representation is within that. We also ask about non-exempt, exempt. We ask about promotions and the number of promotion opportunities that were open and the number of promotions that were received by different racial and ethnic groups in the survey. And we ask questions about the types of mechanisms that are in place to support employees once they become an employee of your organization. We also ask what you're doing to try and attract that talent to work at your organization, right? And so there's questions that deal with recruitment, there's questions that deal with retention, there's questions that deal with promotion. There are all of the metrics that we look at. There's questions that deal with preparation of the pipeline. So we ask a series of questions about internships and the way that you're developing future talent. So, from an employment perspective, that's a bulk of what we look at. On the procurement side, the bulk of what we look at there relates to actual procurement spend and what your supplier composition looks like. We also look at change of spend over time, right? To make sure that we're seeing your spend increase with Hispanic suppliers and not decrease. We also look at, and one part that's really important are the development initiatives, right? And I touched upon this earlier in the conversation. We look at how companies are investing in the Hispanic-owned businesses that they're working with to ensure that those businesses are able to continue to work with them, not only today, right, to fill an immediate contract, but also in the future. And we're focused there. We also look at both sort of generally speaking in terms of the structure of the team that handles this work. We also look at the structure of the team that handles the supplier diversity work. We look at sort of some more organizational level type things, which includes questions that are focused on your strategy around this work and the presence of a strategic plan. And in the philanthropy section, that's a big focus for us. We look a lot at the plans that companies have in place and the strategies with which they approach the work that they're doing in the Hispanic community. And a big piece of the philanthropy section has to do with volunteerism. And that's because we want to make sure that companies are getting their employees involved in this work as well, and that there is a connection being made between the employees and the community. And when it comes to governance, again, we're looking at, the processes in place to promote and move senior executives through your organization, but also looking at, the mechanisms and processes for when there is a board opening, how those positions get filled, as well as, standard metrics that include, sort of the Hispanic representation, again, like in classes A, B, and C, as well as on your board, as some of the key indicators in governance. So, I hope that gives you sort of enough of an idea of the kinds of questions and things we're focused on as part of the CII. And of course, if you want more information about that, we are, happy to conduct an orientation call with you so that we can, talk through what the focus areas are and how you can best participate if you're a new participating company. There's another question here about if the questions change every year. And the answer to that question is no. The questions do not necessarily change every year. The current format of the CII is one that we launched in 2018. The questions have not really changed other than to clarify or tweak them slightly, but the overall sentiment behind the questions have not changed since that time period, and neither has the ratings criteria. When we think about changing and evolving this tool, that process is one that can't just happen overnight. So whenever we are thinking about changing questions and evaluating new items as part of the survey, we will engage stakeholders who have participated in the survey in the past to be part of that process with us. And the reason why we do that is because we need to know if the questions that we are thinking about adding to the survey are questions that you all can answer. We need to know if, these are things that you have looked at in the past, that these are metrics that you collect, or this is information that you have. And if it isn't, we need to allow companies to have time to put those mechanisms in place, because we don't want to make sudden changes to the survey that could ultimately impact how companies perform on the survey. We want to ensure that if we are going to make changes, that those changes have been discussed, so there's no surprises, and that we give enough time, enough of a runway for companies to be able to start collecting that data if they're not currently collecting that data. There's another question here that says, could an organization such as a Hispanic chamber partner with HACR to conduct the CII with smaller organizations such as Fortune 501 or 1000? I don't know who wrote that question because I can't see the name, but if you would like to reach out to us via email, I'll share here thank you, Pamela. Okay. Pamela, I'm sharing my contact information on the screen. Hopefully you can see it. And that way we can connect directly. Obviously, for everyone who is on the call on the webinar with us today, my contact information, as well as that of the other members of the research team, is on the screen as well. So you can feel free to reach out to any of us. And you could also reach out to the research email, which is just research@hacr.org, with additional questions if you would like. There's another question here that says, in order to get the HACR public recognition, do you need 5 stars in all the categories, or is the recognition given by category pillar? So the recognition is given by pillar, right? So each pillar is rated individually, and you can earn 5 stars in every pillar. You can earn 5 stars in one pillar, or 3 pillars, or 2 pillars, right? And you will receive your award. And I did not think about this, but I could have grabbed a one to show you what they look like because I'm in the office and I didn't think about it. But each company who receives 5 stars is presented with an award during a ceremony at the symposium every year. And again, you don't need to receive 5 stars in all of the categories. Those 5-star recognitions are given by pillar. There is a separate award for companies that do receive 5 stars in all 4 pillars. So those are the 2 awards that you can receive as part of the CII process and the public recognition process. I've seen this question actually come up a couple of times. The question is, will the webinar be shared? The answer to that is it will be emailed to all registrants tomorrow and will be live on our website and YouTube page. And I have been brought the award so that I can show you what one looks like. However, I don't think you can see me on screen right now. So if the team on the back end could There you go. Thank you so much. So, this is what the 5-star award looks like for companies that um, receive 5 stars in any of the pillars. They are customized to show the name of the pillar that you receive the award in. And again, as I mentioned, there is a separate award for companies who receive 5 stars in each of the 5 pillars. We have just a few minutes left, so I don't know if there are any additional questions. Let me go back into the main chat and see if there's anything here. Um, I think that we have covered just about all of the questions that are in the chat. I'm thankful to the team who's been helping by posting links to the website and how you can download the report. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to the folks who brought me the awards so that I could show that to you all. And if there are no additional questions, thanks for joining us today. And again, the recording will be shared after today with you via email and will be available on our social media.